Right, so as a Labour conference has kicked off, for once the focus is on Keir Starmer. He's being put under the microscope and getting the questions himself. But if he'd hoped for a puff-piece interview with Laura Kuenssberg this morning, ending up face-to-face with Victoria Derbyshire must have seen the blood drain from his face. Derbyshire didn't disappoint either, not that she had to try particularly hard to have him flapping harder than a line caught flounder. Keir Starmer is determined his Labour government will see the economy grow, despite putting no public money in to make it grow, to invest in it. Yet, when asked the very relevant question, what if it doesn't grow, he just fell to bits. This guy doesn't know what he's doing, needs his hand held at all times, and when that support isn't there, he's like a rabbit caught in headlights, and his cluelessness got rapidly exposed this morning. Right, so Labour conference has begun, and as you can imagine, for a Starmeroid critic like myself, I'm a socialist, so of course I am, because he's a red Tory. There's no shortage of things I could talk about, but being a Sunday morning as this is, the media rounds being done at conference, Starmer was on the Laura Kuenssberg show this morning, though unfortunately for him, he wasn't facing Kuenssberg, but got Victoria Derbyshire instead. Good stuff, he might get asked something relevant for a change, I thought. Well, Derbyshire chose to answer him on economics as part of her interview. Not Starmer's forte particularly, he relies heavily on Rachel Reeves in moments like this, and given his responses, it wasn't hard to see why that is. Derbyshire put to him, "You've pledged that you're not going to borrow for day-to-day spending in the NHS and on schools, social care, other public services, because as you've said this morning a number of times, the way to fund public services is through growth. If you don't get that growth, that means there will be no money or extra money for public services, correct?" It's a fairly standard sort of a starter question, isn't it? It's okay to want to do things a certain way, but what if your ideas don't work? What will you have to do differently? What's your plan B? Well, Starmer clearly didn't have one, given his response, because he said, "I'm confident we can get the growth. That's why we have worked through a plan that tells you how we can get the growth, the people we need, the skills that we need. We've set out a policy on skills just this morning to get the skills in the right area. The partnership with business. This is crucial. This will not be state control. It won't be pure free markets. It will be a partnership with business. What businesses say to me is that they need stability. They need that platform. There are plenty of investors who are absolutely clear in their discussions with me, and they say we will invest in the UK if the circumstances are right, but at the moment, because of this government, there's too much chopping and changing of minds and chaos, and they are holding off from investment. We have to create the conditions for the growth in this country." Right, so Starmer's entire plan for economic growth is to effectively put public services, everything actually that needs funding, up for tenure to the highest bidder then. Instead of funding things via the public purse as a country in control of its own assets does, Starmer wants business to foot the bill instead. But in exchange for what? What sort of a price tag for the rest of the NHS then? Those private health donations seem to be quite the investment at this point, don't they? Let's have more of that, he says. When Starmer ran to be Labour leader, he said he'd renationalise stuff. We know that's a long since abandoned promise now, but who knew his real intent was to actually privatise even faster than we ever have before? Because unless business is getting something, why would it bother to invest? Business needs certainty, he keeps saying. This is apparently why he won't renege on those oil and gas licences Sunak has granted in the North Sea. But it seems to be the economic plan for everything. Factually, you can print money, invest it in people who will spend it in the economy, and the economy will prosper as a result. Instead, it seems Starmer is putting a price tag on the UK for stuff to run. Privatisation has always failed. We know this. We see it every day. All the things now failing since Thatcher fold them off. Water, energy, mail, all the rest of it. Starmer sounds like he'll sell anything that isn't nailed down in order to get the investment cash to run things. Therefore, it would only be a matter of time before everything ends up failing then, surely, just like all the other privatised services that we've seen over the last several decades. The entire economy. Unless he wakes up to that not being a very good idea, that it doesn't work, and changes tack. So let's sincerely hope there is a plan B then, because he didn't mention one in his little speech there. Well, Victoria Derbyshire noticed that as well, as she came back with, "Let me come back to my question, if I may. If you don't get that growth, that means there will be no extra money for public services. Yes?" She's not letting that one go. Try again, Keith. "I'm confident that we will get the growth. If you don't, It is the single defining mission of a Labour government. I've set out 5 missions, 5 purpose-driven things that we will go for over 5 and 10 years. Well, Derbyshire had given him ample opportunity to answer the question. She'd let him run freely up until this point, but now the interruptions had to begin. He wasn't answering her question. He wasn't doing so. He's brought up his 5 missions, the latest 5 that he hasn't broken yet, and picked him up on one in particular, saying one of them is the highest growth in the G7. Everything else hangs off that. To which Starmer replied, "It is the central one. It's not just one of them. This is the central mission of an incoming Labour government." It's interesting that he's prioritised that one over the other 4, though. More important to outdo other countries economically than fix the NHS, make our streets safe, break down barriers to opportunity, and make the UK a clean energy superpower, as he's also pledged to do. But then, by the sounds of things, all of those things are going to be put on the market to be delivered, and as a consequence of that, we'll see higher growth. That seems to be the economic thinking here. Higher than any other country in the G7, despite the fact we have no control or impact on the economies of any of the other G7 countries. It's not the central pledge. It's a really, really stupid one. It's one he has no control over delivering. And he's now stood up and said, this is the most important bit. There is one important detail missing here, though. He still hasn't answered Victoria Derbyshire's question. Starmer said everything else hangs off that, to which Derbyshire replied, absolutely. And what if you don't get it? Starmer's answer, I'm confident that we will. Well, if he doesn't, by selling the country off, there's no plan B, apparently. He's confident because he's listened to businesses and basically heard their demands and said, well, OK, we'll give you what you want. Well, what will that look like then? Well, look at Labour conference as a for instance. Labour members are making up just 22% of the attendees there. Business, 28%. Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert fella, put out a tweet of concern yesterday when it became apparent who some of the sponsors who are sponsoring events at Labour conference are. One of whom turns out to be a buy now, pay later company, a lender, which charges an APR of some 64.5% interest, who were there sponsoring the London Regional Party event, and whose founder was given a platform to speak against regulation of their industry. Starmer's idea of economic prosperity is to spend absolutely nothing, just invite in investors and seemingly promise them whatever it takes to deliver on the things that we all need and the services we all rely on, based on his nothing more concrete than his own self-belief. He'll flush the country down the toilet rather than admit he's wrong, even if it gets proven to be the case, as seems certain. What do you think of Starmer's economic ideas? All a bit Blairite, all a bit Tory? Or do you think more privatisation is the way, in which case convince me, because you won't find an example of it ever having worked before? Have your say in the comments below and be part of the conversation. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where he came out with not one but 2 examples of two-facedness ahead of Labour conference on the subject of saving the NHS, did our Keith, i.e. he's not going to save it. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.